My name's Darby. And I really need to, I'll say first, I'm very grateful to be here. Like, I refuse to say no to speak somewhere, especially when I feel like it's the people who are defending our country and keeping it what it is, what it was meant to be. I was at a retreat, I guess a retreat, but it wasn't a retreat for me. I was driving a lot near Fredericksburg, and I left there pretty disappointed, you know. I'm not going to get into details, but I'll say it was with a significant political figure, and sometimes politicians just disappoint me, so it's really good to be here and see your faces and be welcome, you know. And that's the thing about America, we believe in redemption. Y'all are smiling at me. You just got done hearing that I work with Palestinians and that I work with Black Panthers. You know? I did do those things. I did a lot of things. In my life, I've done a lot of things. And I've done my best to make up for those things. You know? And so I'm going to start kind of going far back, but I have to do it. I was trying to think of how to break this down, and I just can't do it. I usually take 2 hours, and I'm not going to do that, don't worry. I ran away when I was 13. My parents had raised me in the church. They backslid, I guess you would call the word, and they ended up divorcing, and all kinds of things happened. And I got angry, and I ran away. And I started to drink. I usually don't drink now because of how much I drank then. But I was really young, and I was really angry. I quit going to school, and I ran away in Houston, Texas. Make a long story short, I had a really rough 2 years. You know? After that, I started to straighten up a bit, and I began to live with my grandparents after that. But I had always felt like, you know, so many people I was friends with, they were dead, or they were in jail, or they were a really bad situation for them. And so I always felt like I was someone who had survived a plane crash for some reason, you know? And I always felt this great deal of sympathy for people who were having problems in life, and for whatever reason, whether their own choices or not, like, for whatever reason, we're just not fitting in. I guess the least of these is what most of us would probably call that, which I was. I moved to Austin, Texas when I was 20 years old. I moved to Austin from Houston. I was born in Pasadena, Texas. I like Pasadena, Texas. A lot of working people, a lot of refineries, and pretty decent values for most people. But I moved to Austin, Texas, and I started to realize that when I saw things that were wrong, if I got other people involved, I'd have a lot more of an effect on fixing those things that were wrong. And so that's when I became politicized. And very quickly, I guess I had a lot of energy to help people and to get involved. And very quickly, a lot of older radical activists, you know, on the left, began to take me under their wing and invite me to do things and invite me to hang out with them. And they began to let me read Howard Zinn's The People History of the United States and other books like that. And I felt lied to. I felt lied to about my country, and I felt lied to. I really bought that line of logic, because here were these people who were helping people more than I've ever seen anyone help people. And they're telling me that this is the history, and it was so believable, you know, to believe that version, Howard Zinn's version of what our nation was, and that we were a nation founded on oppression. And I believed it, hook, line, and sinker. And the people I respected around me, they really reinforced that. So I had these heroes, and a lot of them were the Black Panthers, because at that time, I believed that they were an organization who helped oppressed people, and I believed that the U.S. government, the FBI, neutralized them, and the law enforcement had a war against them, and that we needed a resurgence of that movement. That's what I believed, and that's what those around me believed. Well, over time, I met these Panthers, and they really took me under their wing, because a lot of the activists around me, they ate tofu, and I ate meat, and I would curse and raise my voice, and the other people talked really calmly. They were from different backgrounds than me. So I fit in with these Panthers in that regard. And they really took me under their wing, and I met this one named Robert King Wilkerson. He's a member of a group called the National Coalition to Free the Angola Free. And he supposedly, at this time, he had spent 29 years in solitary confinement for a crime he didn't commit, and he was exonerated. And I believed that. I found out later that wasn't the case, that he actually pled guilty to murdering a law enforcement personnel. But I didn't know that for years. I believed him. And I really looked up to these people. I started a small concrete statement business in Austin, Texas. I worked really hard at it, and I did really well with it. Better than I would have expected someone with my history to have done. But I really felt bad for this guy, King. And so I ended up moving to New Orleans, where he lived, to help him. And at that point, I guess I had gotten pretty radical, not quite as radical as some of the people around me, but they began to talk to me and teach me a lot about expropriation of funds, you know, about different groups like the Puerto Rican movements and the groups who had robbed armored cars, and how our movement needed funding. I, of course, didn't do that. I wouldn't do that. And at one point, they actually tried to get me to really do that, and I didn't do that. I didn't do that at all, and it was the members of the National Coalition to Free the Angola Free. About a year after that, after moving there, Hurricane Ivan, y'all remember Hurricane Ivan? It came and it almost hit Louisiana, almost hit New Orleans, and the last day before it hit, it went off to the side and hit Alabama and Florida. It left, they had ordered about 10,000 body bags, so the democratically controlled government in Louisiana knew what would happen if a storm had come of that magnitude. And at first, all the social justice groups got mad and were angry, and about 2 weeks later that changed and they went back to whatever they do. And I moved away from New Orleans feeling very defeated. You know, the guy I was trying to get a job for in health, who had been so oppressed by my country at that time, I thought. He was more interested in robbing armored cars, or trying to do something revolutionary than he was get a job. So I ultimately felt like a failure. I moved back to Austin, Texas, and tried to reignite my business, which I had a hard time doing. He told me that I went back to my white privilege, and a lot of activists got really angry at me at that time. So I backed away from the activist world, and just tried to make a living. And about a little bit later after that, that's when Hurricane Katrina hit. And when the storm was coming, and I was watching all the news coverage about what would happen, I finally called this guy, I called him King, Robert King Wilkerson, and I said, hey man, you need to leave. And he was like, hey bro, I'm sorry, I called you a traitor, that you went back to your privilege. I was like, all right. Well, he didn't leave. So the storm hits, and I don't know if y'all remember how horrible that was, seeing those images, you know, of those people in New Orleans. I remember it. It's kind of burned on my conscience. And I also remember looking on Red Cross, all the lists the Red Cross sites had, and you look at it and you see like thousands of people missing their relatives. You remember that? It was really horrible. And I was pretty angry, and it really reinforced everything bad I thought about the United States. It really did. I was like, wow, this government doesn't care about low-income black people. This country doesn't care. You know, Americans don't care. And I went there. And I went to a bunch of activists and I said, hey, there's this group, like the way that leftist center activists work is they have spokes council meetings, right, where a representative from all the different activist organizations get together and make decisions and talk. And they told me that we needed to have a consensus meeting the following week. And well, I knew this guy was in his 60s and I felt pretty bad about it, so I went and bought a boat and I went there. And when I got there, there was about 273 other boats that had went there. And the U.S. government and it was mostly Louisiana, and actually in the Red Cross and the Wildlife and Fisheries, they sent everyone away and told us that they didn't need our help. And there were just patriotic Americans from across the country who came. Well, I was pretty hard-headed, so I went anyway. And when I went in, I got into the city. I had to go around Lake Pontchartrain and across Lake Bourne in a little flat john boat, which I had never even been in a boat, really. And so I was in open waters. It was really scary, but I was very dedicated to what I was doing. I felt like I was doing the right thing, and I had never had more guns put in my face, more people shoot at me, and saw, this is the sad part, saw more dead things, including bodies floating in the water, you know, as I got into New Orleans. And no matter how much I wanted to get in the city to help people, when you try to get under a bridge and people were shooting at you because they were starving and they wanted your boat, you know, because their kids are starving or their grandma's starving, there's not a whole lot you can do. And when you pull up to somewhere and there's 30 people, every one of those 30 people wants to be the first 2 or 3 in the boat. So you can't help anybody because it'll ruin you're in trouble, you know? So I left the city, and I felt really badly about it. And I got back, and the activist community made fun of me and called me a wingnut. And the man who went with me, a man named Scott Crow, who to this, now he actually hates me and is on the news a lot, just on the front page of the New York Times the other day, last month, talking about me. They left attacking me right now. I'll say, leave it at that, guys. They called us wingnuts, and at that time we got another call from another Black Panther who was in trouble there, so we decided to go back. Make a long story short, I helped to save the life of this guy, Robert King Wilkerson. Well, then all of a sudden, I was getting a lot of media coverage and all these people, and I was saying some radical stuff. I was angry about what I experienced in Katrina. And the Panthers, you can imagine they were angry. You can know how they talk. I'm sure some of y'all seen some videos. Well, I talked like that too at one time. And even though I was talking like that, Michael Moore came up and gave us $200,000 to start an organization, even though we were radical, you know, very radical. And after that, Veterans for Peace gave us money. A bunch of groups started giving us money. So with that money, we just started organizing in the community. And one of the things that was really interesting was that after we started to organize and thousands of volunteers started to come, all of a sudden, United for Peace and Justice and Code Pink and Global Exchange and all the founders like Medea Benjamin and all these really prominent left-of-center activists and political players began to come and begin to work with me. And they began to try to co-opt the organization. And at that point, I guess my radicalism had started to die down a bit because I started to actually have to experience things, you know? It wasn't just something I was reading or learning. I was in the 9th Ward, it was really hard hit. There were none of the Black leadership was there who had traditionally been there. Acorn wasn't there, even though that's Acorn was founded in New Orleans. That's where they were. They weren't there. Everyone had left, and so all that was left were a bunch of young people and a bunch of elderly Black men and women and grandmas and grandpas who were trying to keep their property. Well, in the state of Louisiana, which is very socialistic, they decided that they were going to take these huge swaths of area of homes, the 9th Ward and the lower 9th Ward, for private commercial development. And I said, well, wait a minute, like, that's not right. Like, the majority of these homes are owned by a single homeowner who lives in the home. Like, well, they're not back. And I'm like, well, they're not back because you shipped them across the country, you know? And I'm like, that's not right. That's not right. Like, we're not going to let you bulldoze these homes until you have the permission of the homeowner. And so we got pretty radical about it. And some of that radicalness, I'm not ashamed of it all today, because I would do it again. If someone did that to your home, I'd say, you know what? I'll stand in front of that bulldozer. They're not going to bulldoze your home without your permission. That's your home. You know, that's your private property. But then when I said that, the left got mad at me. And Medea Benjamin and all the other folks were said, hey, we can't be sticking up for private property. And I was like, well, I'm sticking up for private property. Like, you don't have to, but I'm going to. It was really a weird moment for me. I realized there were some problems, you know. And then, so we lived about 6 months without water, without running water, without showers, without electricity. And at that point, we had gotten so crazy and radical, and we had gotten into the levels of local government because they realized they couldn't get anything done without arresting us and without us stopping their working. So they began to let us come to the meetings, and they'd say, Brandon, you need to take a shower. That's how I take a shower, and then you turn the water back on for the residents, you know. I'm not going to take a shower until you turn it. So it was that kind of stuff all the time, to get media attention. And I began to get very frustrated. Some of the things that occurred were left-of-center groups began to really come in and try to take it over, and they would do the ugliest, dirtiest things to take over the organization. They tried to sabotage our computers. You know, they didn't like the fact that I was a white male in a position of leadership. And I went through a lot with that. I got invited to Venezuela. I got invited to Venezuela by the government of Hugo Chavez. And he wanted to give FEMA Chavez trailers to the people in New Orleans. And so I talked to some people in government. I said, look, you know, like, you need to come up with these FEMA trailers. And they're like, well, no, we're not going to be able to. And I said, well, I'll get Chavez trailers. And I went. And when I went there, I had some weird stuff happen. I guess my radical reputation was pretty well known. And so when I went there, the person third in line in the government of Venezuela introduced me to some people from PDVSA, which is the Venezuelan, the mother company of Citgo. the executives brought me in. They were very kind to me, brought me to the top floors of the building, got to meet everybody. And then they began to ask me to go with them to eastern Venezuela, called Zulia, a place called Zulia, and then to Colombia. And they wanted me to meet with people who were similar to the FARC, or connected to the FARC. And they had a lot of questions about whether or not the jungles of Venezuela, whether the people were angry there, whether or not the jungles of Venezuela, the gases of the swamps in Louisiana would stop the equipment from the U.S. military being able to see people or detect people. And so what they really wanted was a revolutionary movement in the swamps of Louisiana. And obviously I wasn't real cool with that, so I said no. And they kept pressuring me, I said no. So then I got assigned 2 bodyguards who really weren't bodyguards. They were watching me. They wouldn't let me out of sight. And they began to pressure me to do something equivalent to applying for political asylum. Make a long story short, a number of prominent people on the left here in the United States began to work with that and got them to let me leave a month later. So I was very scared, and when I got back to the United States, I actually kissed the ground. I know that sounds foolish, but I actually did. And at that point, I began to realize that so much of, we had this part of New Orleans where there was no government, and the best minds on the left came and tried to replicate some form of government, some socialist government where we distributed the needs and controlled the blah. And we couldn't do it. And every time I left, people would throw coups. It was like it was a banana republic. And I'm not joking, if I left for 3 days to go back to Austin for something, people would try to overthrow the organization. It was bizarre. And I began to realize, I said, in all of my mind, and at this point I'd been tried by fire as an organizer. We had 23,000 volunteers come in those 2.5 years that I was there, and I began to realize that this concept of having stability and having institutionalized checks and balances that we have here, it's not perfect here, but we have it here, and we've had it since the beginning of our nation. I began to realize that that's not something that can be replicated at all. It's not something that can be easily replicated. I couldn't replicate it even in a little neighborhood, and most of the best minds on the left couldn't replicate it. And at that time, it was like really bizarre. And now I don't talk much about it because I'm so imperfect, but I really do believe that God was helping me to change. Because then this woman talked to me and she said, Brandon, and she was an older Colombian woman, and she said now she works and she teaches corporations how to be more motivated or something. But she was involved in the foundation of the FARC in the 60s, whenever she was what was called an urban guerrilla. So she was a guerrilla, so she was one of the intelligentsia. And then her husband got murdered and all the priests they were working with got murdered. And she said, in our movement we really tried to do something idealistic to help people. But the problem is that any time you have a revolutionary movement like that, half the people who show up are idealistic and want to do the right thing, but then the other half who show up, they're murderers and they're narco-traffickers, and you can't separate the two. And I began to realize that, and I began to really appreciate what we had here. So ultimately what I started to do was just back away from this organization that I had become so prominent in. And I began to back away. I went to Austin. I moved out to the country around 2 acres. Got some chickens. I just tried to heal. I was having some post-traumatic stress problems it was just a different world, that I was in now, trying to be a normal person. And I just wanted to back away. But the thing that was so bothersome is that when I was in New Orleans, every radical organization from around the world sent someone to meet with us. And I say every, not every, but a whole bunch of them did. There were a bunch of Palestinians there. There were a bunch of people from most nations, from France. And they all came with Code Pink, with Medea Benjamin, or they came and they were introduced to us by people in the Congressional Black Caucus, who was working with Medea Benjamin, who was working with Gus Newport, who was working, just across the board, these really prominent people in the left. And they all came because they thought we were the closest thing that the U.S. had to a revolutionary movement in a number of years, So as I tried to back away, I began to feel really bad about it, and I still wasn't a conservative. I thought y'all were white racists, white racists. And I had begun to not hate police officers. I had believed that thing too in my past. And I had begun to realize that wasn't the case because this officer in New Orleans really took a lot of time just to work with me, and help people with me. And so he began to be a human to me, and that narrative broke down. And so everything about me was changing, and all these things I had been dedicated to for so many years were changing. And the people who were really radical wouldn't stop contacting me and telling me what they were doing. And at this point, I started to feel really bad about how I spoke about my country. And so ultimately, a guy named Riyad Ahmad from the Palestinian Children's Welfare Fund, he came to me and he wanted me to set up fake businesses, help him set up fake businesses and DBAs and a bank account. And he was going to give the debit cards to someone in Israel who would then, based on what he said, I gathered that he wanted to support suicide bombing. So I told him, and I called my arch enemy at the FBI. And I called Chief Bryson, who I've become friends with, and he got me in touch with someone who was an FBI agent whose mom I had fixed her home up when she was, in a bad spot in New Orleans. And so we talked. They were very nice. I told them what I had to say, and I left there. And I remember I was driving away, and I said, who are these people I hang out with that if they knew I did this, they would hate me, Like, who are these people? What I did was right. I did the right thing here. And so I just got further distance from these people. And then the FBI, ultimately, it turns out my information was true. They raided his house. And so a few days later, he decides that, well, here's what happened. I get this call, and they're like, Brandon, turn on the news, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, what? And it turns out this guy had, his body was found bound and gagged in the middle of Town Lake in Austin, Texas. And of course, Alex Jones, went nuts with that. But I actually did too. But he didn't realize there was a video recording it, So he gets out of his car and he duct tapes his face a little bit in his hands. It was kind of his final, middle finger to the U.S. government, And he jumps in the lake and he dies. And that's horrible. But you know what? There's a lot of Israeli children who aren't blown to pieces because of that today. And so I'm sorry that the man is dead, but I'm not sorry that I turned him in. And after that, they begin to ask me to do things. And hey, you told us about this situation, would you help us with this? And I was like, you know what? Yeah, I will. I owe that. I'll do that. And so that's what I began to do. For 2 years, I spent most of my time working undercover with the International Terrorism Division of the FBI. And I got a call one day and they said, hey, there's this group of people, and they're domestic, so it's a domestic issue. But we have reports that they're going around and they're actually trying to get people to come, and they're threatening violence to stop the Republican National Convention. And they're threatening to do it by any means necessary. And at this point, I was pretty irritated with the left's tendency to shut people's rights down just because they feel like they're morally superior and to dehumanize. And so I agreed to check it out, and I did. And I went, and these people had come from Minnesota, and they said that we're going around the country, we're trying to encourage people to come and protest the Republican National Convention. But we want to work with the overall demonstration, the 10,000 expected who are going to come. But we want to get people who are going to shut down the Republican National Convention by any means necessary. And that means violence, that means threats of violence, that's what that is. And so I began to work on that investigation. And ultimately what occurred was 500 to 1,000 people showed up in Minneapolis, St. Paul, where the convention was. They had red zone, yellow zone, and green zone. And the green zone were the protesters, the yellow zone were the people who were going to lock down in the streets to make sure the buses didn't get through. And the red zone were the people who were actually going to fight law enforcement to help make sure that the buses of delegates couldn't appoint Sarah Palin and John McCain. And I don't know about y'all, but I saw that as a huge violation of people's civil rights, not letting people talk and not letting people elect a political delegate. Ultimately, 2 guys made Molotov cocktails. There were actually 3 bomb plots that got busted and people were found guilty of. But there were 2 guys making Molotov cocktails, and I was the person who uncovered it. So the FBI basically said, here's the deal. We don't want you to testify, but the U.S. Attorney's Office does. It's up to you. But if you do testify, you need to know that your identity is going to come out. I said, oh, I don't know about that. I thought about it, and I said, well, I think that's the right thing to do, so I'll do it. And right before it was going to come out, I released a letter, because I knew that the defense attorney already had the information. And I released a letter. and it said that what I had chosen to do and why. And that I couldn't get into detail because there was a trial coming up. Immediately, instead of it, right before the election, instead of it being like far leftists tried to firebomb and burn and maim Republicans and police officers, which is what they did, we're going to do, the New York Times framed the story as peace activists feel betrayed by their government. And I was like, uh-oh. And so the initial story was, and that all of the left's mainstream media reported it and carried this narrative. It's all about narrative, right? This, like your narrative is that they say you're white racist Klan members and you really just don't want black people in power. That's what they say about you. That's what the left mainstream says, and you know that's what they say. Most of you do. But it was that the FBI, I was an agent provocateur for the FBI, and that I had made the bombs and planted them on them. And then some information came out, and it turns out that the narrative then became, or then I was like, oh my gosh, now they realize I didn't do that. Like, they were blaming me, this is so horrible, you know? And instead of just like it being my vindication, they just like changed the narrative and acted like they never had the first narrative in the first place. So then the mainstream media promoted this notion that these guys did it under the FBI's control. Me being the person who was the agent provocateur, right? And a little while longer, some more information came out, and then the guys changed the story again. And then the media changed their narrative again. And then the narrative is that it was no longer the FBI, because I gave them the idea to do it. And I was like, uh-oh, that's not good. How do I prove I didn't do that, you know? And so I went to trial, and I was the government's witness. It was a very frightening experience, you know? And we had a hung jury, you know? And it basically boiled down to everyone who was a conservative voted they were guilty, everyone who was a liberal voted that I was an agent, or that they weren't guilty. And I was pretty upset by that. And then what I found out was that the FBI had 200 hours of recorded jailhouse calls, right? And they had only gone through 4 hours. That's why when people say the FBI is listening to us, I know they're not, because I know that even in a high-profile case, they had like only gone through 4 hours of recorded telephone calls. And so by the next trial, which I agreed to testify again, they had assigned 35 agents to go through the 200 hours of calls. And then the whole narrative was right there. The guys, they were lying, and it was beyond a shadow. They even talked about it on the calls that I didn't know, and that the FBI didn't know. So the next trial, the guy's going to fight it. The left media is going crazy, attacking me. They're trying to get me to go in the witness protection program, and I said, you know what? I didn't do anything wrong. And usually people who do this kind of thing do go in the witness protection program, you know? But the reason their narrative is allowed to exist is because they do that and shut up, and I'm not going to shut up because I did nothing wrong. I'm proud of what I did, and I'm going to challenge that narrative because that's not right what they say. So the guys pled guilty, and once they realized the evidence said they were guilty. But see, here's the catch. At this point, George Soros, PBS, that's your tax dollars, so I'm really mad at you for funding this. Because you paid for a horrible movie about me and the men and women I served my country with, even though you didn't mean to, because you have no choice. It's PBS, right? So PBS, George Soros, Robert Redford, HBO, they had started making this movie about it, about me as an agent provocateur and how the FBI does wrong, and how law enforcement does wrong to innocent, idealistic, left-of-center activists who just want peace. And we try to set them up. And when that happened and the guy came to court and said, I admit, I embellished, actually I lied, that Brandon Darby of the FBI had anything to do with me making Molotov cocktails. I was like, I'm vindicated. But guess what? No. You know what the narrative was then? My performance of hyper-masculinity. The FBI choosing to use someone as macho as me made it inevitable that young men would want to prove their manhood and then make bombs. I know you think it's funny, but here's the thing. Here's the thing that happened. They slaughtered me. Slaughtered me. My mom cried every day. For 1 year, my mom called me every day crying. I joke you not. I wanted to die. You know, I was like, who is this world I live in where they can't look at the facts, and even though I give them the transcripts, they won't tell the truth. They're spinning it to where, like, these are innocent left-of-center activists and against the evil Republicans. And I'm like, that's not what's happening here. What happened here was that these people were trying to violate the rights of conservatives And they were trying to say that, now they're trying to say that the government was wrong for protecting the rights of conservatives when that's what they're there for, not to raid a Gibson store, but to protect the rights of Americans. And who are these people to do this? This is horrible. Why are they, they're fighting for the right to be able to oppress Republicans and conservatives because they are morally superior than the evil, racist conservatives, right? And it made me so mad. And I couldn't do anything about it. And they'd interview me and I'd say what I had to say, and they'd never print it. And then NPR got involved, and NPR said, they did this real nice piece talking about all the good I had done, because when that came out, even though there had never been a bad story, out of the 100 stories about me and the work I did in New Orleans, and I know I'm over time, but I have to go over because I'm so excited, I have to do it. There had never been a bad story. And all of a sudden, when that happened in the beginning of 2008, I was this evil, agent provocateur, womanizer, abusive. I kicked the door in of a woman's shelter. I pistol whipped people. I mean, these are the stories that were going all over, hundreds and hundreds of websites, all the time. And I was like, this is horrible. They've taken my history, almost like Trotsky. That's what it reminded me of, is where they took Trotsky and they erased his photo because they didn't like him anymore, you know? And I was like, they're just rewriting history and they know they're lying. And every time I prove they're lying, they just change the story and act like they didn't lie in the first place. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to die. And you know what happened? My phone rang one day. And I was like, hello? And this guy was like, Brandon Darby? And I'm like, yeah, who are you, man? He goes, my name's Andrew Breitbart. Anyway, I'm going to start crying because you don't know, man, what that felt like. I felt like I had done the right thing for my country, like when I owed it, you know? I didn't take any money. You know, an FBI agent testified in a later trial where a young leftist was in trouble in a federal court. She was being tried for threatening my life and trying to kill me, which they exonerated her for in Travis County, even though she admitted she did it. Because I was a right-wing scumbag. And that's a whole other story. But whatever. They testified, he said, you know, in the course of 2 years, we paid Brandon $13,000, and we believe that all of that money was used to be reimbursed for travel expenses because of the work he did. It's possible because of the receipt situation that he profited $3,000 in 2 years, working almost full time with us. But it's unlikely. It's just unfortunately in the situations he was in, he couldn't really say, let me save my receipt. You know? And, so I started talking to Andrew, and he goes, why don't you defend yourself, man? And I was like, I do. They don't print what I say. And he said, you can write on my website, and you can say whatever you need to say. I don't care what your politics are. And he's like, are you right-wing? And I was like, I don't think so, man. I'm pretty sure I'm not racist, you know? And he's like, well, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And I was like, oh, blah, blah, blah. But he goes, you're conservative. I was like, I'm not ready to say that. And so I began to fight back, you know? I began to punch and talk. I fought Acorn. Acorn's found Wade Rathke hated me because that was one of the things that happened is whenever in New Orleans and all the black leadership was gone, like I said earlier, when they came back 4 months later, you know, man, it was bad. They're like, you need to work under our leadership. And I'm like, no. And they're like, well, we're going to say you don't work with black community leaders. And I said, well, I'm going to say that I do work with black community leaders, like that grandma and that grandpa that stayed to help their community. And I'm going to say the reason I don't work with you is because you're really not a black leader. You're just a black guy who's kind of a token black guy, and you have white liberals and white academics behind you, you know, and you're promoting a democratic narrative. That's what it is. That's all it is. You're not the people, because the people in the community, they didn't have a political, they say, Brandon, we don't work with you because of your politics. We work with you in spite of your politics, you know. I realized that. But it was a community leader, you know. But anyways, so Wade Rathke was attacking me, and he told me, they started calling me a dirty snitch, a pig, a rat. And Wade Rathke said, it's a shame that I snitched on people. So on that day that the government voted to defund Acorn, I was proud that the Breitbart crew sent an email to everyone taking the vote. And it said, Wade Rathke implies that he wishes Republicans and cops had been burned and made. Because he did. That's what he said, but it was a shame that I told him. But you know, I fought back, and the more I fought back, the more they attacked me. Even right now, they're attacking me. This documentary is coming out about me, how evil I am, on September 6th on PBS, the one that's funded by Soros dollars, and you, all of you funded it with your viewers, like, or taxpayers like you. And So yeah, you know, it's horrible, it hurts my feelings, but I get to say what I believe in, I get to defend it. I know in some circles, especially in the Austin Tea Party groups, like FBI is so evil, but the fact is the job is there's things to do that aren't the job, and I'm not defending Eric Holder, I'm not defending the politically appointed leadership, but the men and women who serve every day, you know, I know a lot of them, I worked with them, and they're decent people, they're God-fearing people, they're inspired by the Tea Party movement, they believe in the Constitution, and they want to protect people's rights. I know that to be true. I swear that on my honor, that is what I know. And I would defend those men and women. And when people say things about them that aren't true, I go on the offensive. I start attacking it because it's like, that's not true. You know, don't say it about them, that's not true. And I'll argue. And they can't stand it because they're so used to having their narrative, right? They're so used to having their narrative that everyone who isn't them is a racist, you know? I had someone recently, she's a Fox News contributor, someone I've been friends with in my life. I'm not going to say her name, but she's a leftist. And she said, you know, it's only academics know how to properly interpret data. Hold on. And public policy should be based on data so that people will live correctly. Now think about that, you know? Think about that. So I'm really not that dude. And then here's this other thing is, right now is, you know, Mother Jones is attacking me and all these dirty things, and I'm a womanizer and all these things, and I'm not, you know, I'm not. At all. I don't think I am. You know? My mother doesn't think I am, my sister doesn't, most of the people I've dated don't. But I tell you what, there's a couple of ex-girlfriends from the ACLU who, like, that's all they do now, their whole career is just talking about how I'm a womanizer. You know, in the media, it's kind of bothersome. But here's the thing. So right now, you have people, okay, so the New York Times, okay, so here, the governor's mansion gets burned down, right? Remember that? State of Texas. Okay. Steve McGraw, head of the DPS, comes out and says, we have links to the group who is responsible for the bomb plots against Republicans in Minnesota. And the news went nuts. And all of a sudden, the mainstream news, the Austin American-Statesman, said, a bomb plot which law enforcement agencies routinely credit Brandon Darby with having stopped. And I was like, oh, that's in the mainstream paper. That's so nice, you know? It's Vindication, right? 3 days later, the New York Times put a story out and it said, a bomb plot which Brandon Darby encouraged. And you know what I said? Oh no. And you know who said, oh no, bigger than me? Andrew Breitbart. He began to tear into him, and they wouldn't print a correction, they wouldn't print a correction, they wouldn't print a correction. So I got an attorney and I filed a lawsuit. You know what they did? They printed a very legalistic correction. But instead of taking out the body of the text, like they do when they print other corrections, they left it in and put a little link you had to click on to find the correction. And I said, I started this organization here, I'm going to give you these cards. I want you to have them. It's called Citizen Patriot Response. And like, check this out. You know what? We talked about narrative and how important the narrative is. And you know how I talked about this officer in New Orleans named John Bryson, who he worked with me, and it kind of made me stop that thing I thought about cops being pigs and all that awful stuff. It kind of broke it down, and he became a human to me, you know, interacting. So I was thinking about that, and I was like, man, if we could find a way to mobilize Tea Party people and get a way for them to actually just interact and help in low-income communities, that would break that narrative down. Because that's what Catherine Engelbrecht, you know Catherine Engelbrecht, she's from King Street Patriots. She started an organization called True to Vote. Yeah. She realized when they were going and they were watching voters to make sure that the rules were being followed. And the first day was a little weird. The second day, everyone was getting along. And the third day, Sheila Jackson Lee showed up, sticking her finger in their chest, saying, "My people were enslaved. We fought for the right to vote. You're not going to take it away," yelling at the top of their lungs. You know. So once again, the people were getting along. It was just the leadership, the traditional black leadership, who was making those divisions. And so we decided that we would start an organization to challenge that. And so the whole deal is if you have an organization or you want to help people, and if you tried to help people and you found out that in order to help you have to go to this like left-of-center nonprofit where they try to indoctrinate you and you feel marginalized, if you want to help, the back of my card says, If you or someone you know needs help or wants to help others, please contact us so we can put our heads together and find a solution. And it's called CPR, Citizen Patriot Response. And it's guaranteed to get some attention to the good work that conservatives do, because here's the board. The board president is Catherine Engelbrecht. Hannah Giles of Acorn fame is on the board. Andrew Breitbart's on the board. And then I'm the director. So I'd like you to please take the cards, like when they're getting passed out, and feel free to contact me. No matter what, like contact me. We'll find a way to get people involved if you're not already involved. And we'll find a way to help, because that's what it's all about. That's what it's all about. I don't take money from it. You know, I fixed an air conditioner the other day, the scars and the wounds on my hand, I work with my hands. And that's what I do. That's what I need to do that to feel okay, actually. I need that. But I don't want to take money from this because I don't want it to be about that. There's so many groups right now that are about that in the conservative world. You know, they'll say, wow, the Lord's really touched you and with me with your story, and we need to get your story out. If you'll pay us, and I'm like, no. Like, this is a ministry. Even though I live an imperfect life, I struggle with cigarettes. I'm so far from perfect. I'm not a preacher. I'm not a pastor. I'm so far from perfect. I try, but I'm really far from perfect. You know, but it's a ministry, and I don't want to take money for it. And I want to find groups who aren't taking money for it. I'm not talking about a little salary for themselves, but I'm talking about people who aren't trying to make a business model out of helping our country stay okay. And I want to support them with the skill sets I know. That's what I have to do. I know these skill sets because I've lived this life, and I want to help with that. So please contact me with that. Let me know. You know, and here's the other thing about narratives before I stop. To most of the country, to a lot of the country, to a lot of people under 25, this is what they believe. They believe that if you want to vote, if you want to help people, you vote left. And if you want to vote for rich white racists, you vote right. That's the narrative. You know, and if you don't break that narrative down, and if private charity doesn't start finding effective, helpful ways of addressing needs that are actually encouraging people to do better in the world instead of perpetuating the system, people are eventually going to vote left. And it will end up being government force collectivism. We'll lose what we have. We'll lose this system. And so I don't want to see that happen. You know? So let's put our heads together. That's what I ask. And I'm so appreciative that y'all let me come here tonight. Thank you.